Okay, let's go through some of the finer details on how to do a box plot. Now, how to do a box plot is actually part of an earlier standard. That's back in standard SP4, which states display numerical data in plots on a number line, including dot plots, histograms, and box plots. Now, notice here that I've actually got two different plots. I've got a dot plot and the beginnings of a box plot also. Normally this doesn't happen, but we're doing this just to become familiar with the different plots. Again, you would typically just do one or the other. Here we're overlapping one on top of the other. Now, what happens with your box plot to get your rectangles for your middle quartiles, for your second and third quartiles, it's determined by your values for your first and third quartiles. So notice here that this segment corresponds to the 17, and this segment over here corresponds to the 8. And then of course this here is a median for the whole data set. So that's what I use to draw those two rectangles. Now, there's also another piece to this. The box plot is sometimes referred to as a box and whiskers plot. So now the question is, I know that there's some segments that are drawn on each side. The question is, well, how far do I take those line segments? So here's how that is determined. Where to draw those whiskers is based on outliers. Now, we have what we call mild or suspect outliers, and that's based on 1.5 times your interquartile range. And then we also have what are referred to as extreme or highly suspect outliers, and those values are based on 3 times the interquartile range. So let's take this data set and determine our outliers. First, for our mild outliers, we're going to take 1.5 times our interquartile range, which in this case was 9, the 17 minus 8. So if we multiply 1.5 times 9, we get 13.5. Now, those boundaries are referred to as fences. So to get the fence at the lower end, we would start at 8 and go to the left 13.5. So what's going to happen is I'm actually going to be at negative 5.5, so I'm actually going to be out here. And then for the upper fence, for the fence on the right, we're going to start at 17 and go to the right 13.5, and we would be at 30.5, which would be way out here somewhere. So notice that none of my data points are on the outside of those two fences. Everything's on the inside. So basically, note at the bottom it says whiskers are placed based on data points to the right and left of those fences. So in other words, another way of thinking of it would be that your whiskers are going to go to your data points that are not outliers. So another way to think of it would be that your whiskers are going to be drawn out to the last value that's not an outlier in each direction. So over here on the right hand side, I only go this far because again that's my last data point that is not an outlier, and then the same thing to the left, I go this far because that's my last data point that's not an outlier going in the opposite direction. Okay, let's take a closer look at outliers. There's no data set here. There's just some made up values to kind of concentrate on the idea of outliers. So let's say for example, okay, I've got my second and third quartiles here, and it goes from 18 to 22, so my interquartile range is 4. For my fence, for my mild outliers, that's going to be 1.5 times 4, which would be 6. So I'm going to start at 22 and go to the right 6, which would put me at 28. And then I'm also going to start at 18 and go to the left 6, which would put me at 12. So those are the fences for my mild outliers. Then my extreme outliers are based on 3 times the interquartile range. When this case would be a 4, so it's 3 times 4 is 12. So for my extreme outlier fences, I'm going to start at 22 and go to the right 12. 12, which would put me at 34. And then I would start at 18 and go to the left 12, which would put me at 4. Now I just made up some data points, and we've got those dots on our graph here. Our whiskers are going to go to the last values that are not outliers. So here to the left, here's my value, my last value that is not an outlier, so that's how far I take the whisker to that side. And then over here, that is my last value. To the right, that's not an outlier, so that's how far I take that line segment. Notice here that I've got one value for this data set that would be considered a mild outlier. And then notice for the extreme outlier fences, I have one value way out here that would be considered an extreme outlier. And in fact, I've got a second one. I've got another extreme outlier over here. So again, just a little bit more detail as far as how to compute and how to figure out your outliers and where your fences should go.